Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about burn and dodge in your workflow using different tools and different approaches in your workflow that will give you the better looking results in your photographs. So the most basic way is by using the burn, the dodge and burn tool directly on a pixel layer. So for example, on this case, I'm working with a tablet. So I select my brush size, and I am going to select, I'm going to do 50%, I'm going to do 70% exposure, and I'm going to target my midtones. And this is pretty radical, but I want you to see through the video what I'm talking about. So for example, if I wanted to really darken these shadows over here, I can start painting in with the burn tool. And as you can see, things start getting really dark. I can do the same over here. So that's one possible way. And I'm working directly on my background layer, which is in a pixel layer. At this point, this is a final image, so all the layers are flattened. But so you can see how everything gets dark, and so you could use this approach. The problem with that is this is a destructive way of doing things. And so for example, I darkened some of the shadows, and now I'm gonna use the dodge tool to brighten some other areas. And so like I said, I'm going with a very strong exposure here, but so what I want, the purpose of this is so that you can see how the adjustments affect the image. So it's a pretty ridiculous way of doing it, but you get the point. You could have done it this way. The problem is that if you want to go back, or if you want to come back to this image later, there's no going back. You will either close this file and save it, or close it and not save it, but you will not have those adjustments. Another approach would be, for example, if you duplicate your background layer and do the same thing. So burn some areas, darken some areas that you decide that need to be some shadows, some, give some dimension to your images. So that's a good way to do it. The problem is this is also a destructive way of doing this, this burn and dodge. It's you get a little more leeway in that you at least have a duplicate. You could go back, delete that adjustment layer and then go back to it. But still, you have these adjustments are affecting both highlights and shadows at the same time. The next possible way that you could approach the burn and dodge in your workflow would be, for example, so let's get rid of this layer, and this is back to our original. If I create what is called a burn and dodge layer, which is just a layer filled with a 50% gray in a soft light blending mode. So this is pretty much a transparent layer, and you could do one of these, for example, one for burning. So if you want to do like burn some of these shadows, for example, really bring out some of the details and the dimensionality of your photograph. So this is a better approach than working on an actual pixel layer. And we could add another burn and dodge layer, and I have an action for creating this, so that's why it appears really fast. But you could do it like if you go new layer, fill, we want to do 50% gray, and then just switch the blending mode to soft light, and it's essentially the same thing. So for example, you could use one of these layers for burning and another layer for dodging, and that way you have at least more control in your workflow. So if something in these adjustments do not work right for you, then you could at least go back, delete that layer, or adjust as necessary. The next best approach, and I think this is the one I recommend, is if you work with luminosity masks, and if you don't know what luminosity masks are, you should check my tutorial on how to create luminosity masks, because these are essential, I believe, for creating the best possible looking photographs, because that's what gives you the utmost control. So let me show you some of my masks, and if you've never worked with these, this might not make much sense right now, but just bear with me. We're gonna address them in a little bit. So the way I deal with my burning and dodging needs is, so once I created my masks, I'm gonna create a burn and a dodge layer, and so we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna burn some of these shadows in different areas of the photographs. So I'm going to go in my mask. I'm going to look for the one that is going to give me the control on how the adjustment is going to apply and where. So remember, when you are working with masks, a black area in a mask will not show your adjustment, but the white areas will show your adjustment. Gray tones in a mask will somewhat show your adjustment. So for example, I'm going to use this one here because it's, you know, it still has some of it's selecting all the dark tones in the area, but it's leaving untouched the highlights in different areas. And I'm going to press Command H to hide the marching ants. The marching ants are still there. I'm just toggling in on and off. Because it's really distracting trying to work with like all this visual noise. But if you hide them, now you can see. And so I'm going to do the same on this layer. And see, right now I'm painting on the, you know, my adjustment here. And it's barely noticeable, even though you can see on the burn and dodge layer, you can see the dark area. And the reason for that is this, by applying the adjustment through a mask, it's only affecting the darkest tones in the image, but it's leaving the highlights alone. So this will give you more control in how, so in essence, it's not darkening your highlights, it's just, you know, making your shadows richer, deeper, or not necessarily your shadows, but like the darkest tones in your photograph. So like I said, this is a really strong adjustment. It's really ridiculous. It's just so that you can see it through the video. So I'm going to turn on and off. So that's without it, that's with, that's without, that's with. And so let's do the same for the dodging. And so we're going to do the same. So we're going to, so here are my marching ants. So we're going to deselect. And now I'm going to go in, because now I'm going to target some of the highlights here for the dodging. For this particular area, I could use this mask or this mask right here. The lights mask. And remember, the selection is still active. I'm just hitting Command H on a Macintosh or Control H on a PC, but the selection is active. We're just hiding the marching ants. And so we're gonna keep the same settings, and now we're gonna paint the, you know, the dodging on different parts of your image. And so, and like I said, maybe you can see through the video, maybe you can't. But we'll do the before and after in just a sec so that you can see. Because this is very subtle, the way the adjustment gets applied because of the mask. Here you can see that's before, that's after. So that's without any adjustment. So that's with brightening our highlights, and that's darkening our midtones, our shadow areas, the dark tones in our image. So that's the next, that's the third way that we could apply the burn and dodge into our workflow. So let's get rid of these two guys right here. And so because our selection is selected, we're going to hit Command D or Control D for deselect. And now I want to do the exact same thing, but this is actually in my workflow the way I do it. I don't really use the dodge and burn tool. So the way I do it is I create my burn and dodge layer, a layer filled with 50% gray, and the opacity, the blending mode set to soft light. And so I am going to use the same mask that we used before, which is darks 3. We're going to come back up here and we're going to hit Command H to hide the selection. I'm going to choose my brush tool and I'm going to set my foreground color to black. And I'm going to choose a 50% opacity up here. This is not the opacity of the layer, but the opacity at which the brush tool will apply the black paint. And so remember, I have my selection active, it's just hidden. And so now I'm going to start painting with my brush. And it's essentially the same thing as the burn and dodge tool, but I find it, at least this is easier for me. This is what makes more sense in my workflow. I use the brush tool extensively, and so it doesn't make sense to me switching to the burn and dodge actual tool, because in the end the results are going to be the same. And so you can see that's the before, that's the after. And again, because I'm applying the adjustment through a mask, this mask right here, the black paint is applying the strongest where you see white. Anything that you see dark, that you see black, dark gray, it's barely, it's barely showing. So this is a burn and dodge for burning. In fact, let's say this is a burn layer. So now I'm going to deselect and I'm going to create a new burn and dodge layer, but this one is going to be for dodging. Except, so this one, the mask, the layer that I use for dodging, instead of being the blending mode being soft light, I'm going to set it to overlay because it's going to keep my contrast at a better level. And so I'm going to go back and select the same mask right here. I'm going to hit Command H or Control H on PC to hide the marching ants. But remember, they are still there. The selection is active, it's just hidden. And so let me show you the mask one more time. Anything that you see light gray, white, it's the adjustment is going to apply the strongest. Anything that is dark or dark gray is going to apply the least, not so strong. And so I'm going to, with my brush tool, white paint, blending mode to overlay, I'm going to start painting, some of the highlights here. Because I am doing it through a mask, you can see, for example, in this foreground area, the moss is getting really bright. You can see how bright it's getting. But the dark areas are not getting washed or gray, because if we go into our mask, this is almost black. So the adjustment is really not showing through. So there you go. We start brightening some of the, the highlights here. And like I said before, this is really ridiculous. I would never actually do this on my image. But I want you to be able to see it through the video, how the actual dodging works through the mask. And the other advantage is that by doing it this way, this is a non-destructive way of working with your images. If you don't like it, you can still delete these two layers, and your background, your original image is untouched. It's not altered in any way, so you can go back and forth until you find the way that makes the most sense for you. And so to recap what we did, so the first way that we used was, for example, the burn tool directly onto our background layer. So we darken. This is the quickest, easiest way. The problem with that is that it's going to darken both highlights and shadows. Let's go back here in our history. So deselect. And so if we do the same thing with a Dutch tool, it's going to, brighten some of the areas that we want to brighten. But by doing this, this is a destructive way of working, and some of it's brightening both highlights and shadows. The other way that we could do it, if we are interested in keeping our original layer untouched, is by just duplicating the layer, and you can do it in many different ways. So Command J or Control J on PC or Mac, that's how you duplicate the layer. Or you could just drag the layer to this little icon right here, and it duplicates that. Or the other way that you could do is just duplicate layer. Or you could go up here to the layer menu and do duplicate layer. So for now we have the duplicate layer, and it's essentially the same thing. We can burn, we can dodge some areas, but it's still destructive, and it's still, let me back up. Actually, it's not destructive because we can get rid of this image, and our original pixel layer, it's intact. The problem by doing it on a pixel layer is that the adjustments, dodging and burning, are working on both highlights and shadows. So the next way that we can do it, that we tried, was creating the burn and dodge layer, which is a layer filled with a 50% gray set to soft light. And we can use the same thing, which is essentially the same as working with a duplicate layer on the, duplicating our background layer. But the benefit of using the burn and dodge layer is if your image is so not flattened, and you have all the different adjustment layers in your workflow, you will not have a solid pixel layer blocking the adjustments if you need to go back and edit something. And finally, the way that I recommend doing this is through a luminosity mask, setting up your burn and dodge layer, and then use a luminosity mask with a black or white brush, depending on what you want to do. So for example, if you want to darken, you would do through a layer. And the other thing is you can actually control the opacity of the layer. So for example, if this adjustment was too much, you can reduce it by reducing the opacity. So you essentially control how strong that adjustment gets applied. Same thing with like if we want to do a Dutch layer, so we create our 50% filled gray layer set to overlay, white paint with a brush, and we find one of our luminosity masks that will do the trick for us for what we want to do. And so this is the same thing. It's not, you can see I'm going over and over and over and over, and barely it's starting to alter the shape, the shadow areas, but it's 100% white at this point, and you can barely see it, and that's because the mask is preventing to target tone that I don't want to target. You can see it here as well. It's because this is really black, deep shadows in our mask. The adjustment will it's barely going to be visible. So I hope this was useful to you. Let's get rid of these two. And if you want to find out more about how to create and how to use the luminosity masks, check out my tutorial here on my website, or you can contact me privately for private instruction via screen sharing on Skype or in person in the Seattle area. So thank you very much, and let me know what you think about this.